I never expected to square off against a conniving homeowners association board in my golden years. After retiring, I moved to what I thought was a peaceful suburb in Florida. Somewhere I could tend my rose garden, walk my dog every morning, and maybe tinker in the garage without a care in the world. But everything changed when I received a neatly typed letter from our HOA, stuffed into my mailbox like a bad omen. Its tone was all sweet politeness on the surface, but every sentence dripped with veiled threats, extra fees, fines for violations, and a final warning that I comply or face consequences. Now, I've met all kinds of overbearing types in my life, especially when I served in the military, but none as delightfully unbearable as the HOA's president, Karen. She's the kind of person who marches around with a clipboard and a perpetual scowl, acting like the neighborhood belongs to her. At first, I tried to keep my head down. After all, I'm just a quiet guy who prefers to mind his own business. But that's the thing about bullies. The more you ignore them, the bolder they get. It started with petty notices about my rose bushes exceeding community standards. Then, out of nowhere, I got slapped with a warning for using the wrong shade of paint on my mailbox, a shade that apparently offended Karen's refined sensibilities. But the real shocker came one morning when I noticed my living room window had been tampered with. Pried open while I was out picking up groceries, I found a sloppily printed copy of the HOA bylaws on my coffee table, as if someone wanted to say, "We're watching, and we can get inside anytime we want." That was the final straw. I'm not one to pick fights, but I've also never been good at backing down when somebody pushes me too far. If this HOA thinks they can strong-arm me just because I'm a retiree who likes peaceful afternoons, they've got another thing coming. Sometimes, to protect the life you love, you've got to stand up and fight for it, no matter who's on the other side of the fence. The morning after I discovered my living room window had been tampered with, I decided enough was enough. I hopped on the phone and tried to reach someone from the HOA board, anyone who could give me a straight answer. The receptionist passed me around like a hot potato, until finally I got a call back from none other than Karen herself. Her tone was so sugary sweet, I could practically hear her smiling through the phone. She asked if I was enjoying the neighborhood and tossed in a veiled reminder about following rules for the good of our community. I calmly mentioned the break-in, told her it was peculiar that someone left HOA bylaws on my coffee table without my consent. She breezily dismissed my concerns, stating that any real community member would have appreciated the extra reading material. I felt my temper flare. There's a fine line between helpful and menacing. When I pressed for an explanation, she changed the topic to my allegedly non-compliant rose garden. That conversation was my first real sign that these people weren't just prissy neighbors with a thing for uniform lawns. They were determined to show me that they held all the cards. I realized this wasn't simply about property lines or color codes on mailboxes. It was a power play. Karen spoke as if I was a trespasser in my own home, as though she'd personally done me a favor by letting me live here. I hung up feeling uneasy but resolute. I'd dealt with tough people before. During my military years, you either stood your ground or got walked all over. So I told myself, if they're going to test me, I'll make sure they understand I'm not one for rolling over. Little did I know, this was only the tip of the iceberg. I moved to this suburban community in Florida a couple of years back, hoping to enjoy the sunshine and a slower pace of life. The neighborhood itself looks like something out of a travel brochure. Pristine sidewalks, neat rows of palm trees swaying in the breeze, and pastel-colored homes arranged in perfectly measured lots. At first glance, it's downright picturesque. Underneath that tidy surface, however, is a tangle of politics that would put any soap opera to shame. I live alone. My wife passed away some time ago, and my kids are off in other states, busy with their own families. While that used to feel lonely, I'd grown to appreciate the solitude. Plus, I've got 2 dear friends who live a couple of miles away, Hank and Shirley? Both are retired law enforcement and about my age. We served in the same unit at different times, so we share a mutual respect for each other's experiences. Once a month, we get breakfast at a local diner. After the fiasco with the break-in, I knew I'd need to lean on them for some practical advice. The neighbors on my street are a mixed bunch. There's Martin, a widower in his 70s who loves to tinker with old cars, and the Lewis family, who moved here to care for their elderly mother. Everyone's polite enough, but I can sense an undercurrent of fear when it comes to discussing the HOA. In hushed tones, people mention fines that seem arbitrary, rules that change overnight, and Karen's habit of showing up unannounced to snap photos of people's yards. It's creepy. Karen herself appears to be in her mid-50s, always dressed in crisp pastel suits, hair in a neat bob, and eyes that miss nothing. She's backed by a small circle of loyal board members, folks who seem to enjoy the power trip. Rumor has it she's been pulling the HOA's strings for a while, implementing all sorts of odd restrictions. Whether these folks follow her out of genuine support or fear of retaliation is anyone's guess. All I know is, the moment Karen set her sights on me, she intended to make an example out of anyone who dared question her authority. And once she has you in her crosshairs, there's no easy way out. Right after that unsettling phone call, I started noticing more peculiar things around my home. My trash cans, which used to be neatly placed at the side of the garage, were inexplicably rolled out to the curb on non-collection days. I'd get home from running errands to find strange flyers taped to my front door, always reminding me of a new rule or a looming violation. It was like someone wanted to rattle me, to let me know my every move was being watched. I paid Hank and Shirley a visit, laid out the bizarre run-ins I'd had with Karen and her crew. Shirley, who spent nearly 2 decades as a detective, advised me to document everything. Dates, times, photos, even audio recordings if I could manage. Hank suggested I install a simple home security system. They might consider it a challenge, he said, but it's your legal right to protect your property. So I bought a couple of discreet cameras and put them in places no one would suspect. Things reached a boiling point when I received a formal final warning from the HOA. Inside the envelope were close-up photos of my rose bushes, along with a sharply worded letter accusing me of endangering neighborhood aesthetics and failing to meet horticultural codes. It demanded a hefty fee to cover landscape improvement costs. Now, I'm not much of a horticulturist, but I know a money grab when I see one. They were clearly fishing for any excuse to sanction me financially. I decided to push back by mailing a certified letter to the HOA, stating my objections and requesting evidence of any legitimate violations. But that only seemed to fan the flames. A couple of days later, a black SUV parked across the street from my house for hours. It might have been a coincidence, but the timing was suspicious. When I stepped out front to confront them, the SUV sped away. It was almost laughable, if it weren't so invasive. Did Karen really think shadowing me with some shady enforcer would make me fold? I could feel adrenaline coursing through my veins, reminding me of the old days when I had to stay sharp under pressure. My mind was set. I'd fight this all the way, legally and calmly but firmly. If Karen and her board wanted a war of attrition, then that's exactly what they were going to get. I'd already gathered allies in Hank and Shirley, and now it was time to gather evidence, enough to expose these bullies for what they truly were. Things really picked up once I put those security cameras in place. Every other day, I'd catch glimpses of unfamiliar figures skulking near my property line, usually late at night when normal folks would be fast asleep. One time I checked the footage and saw a tall man in a baseball cap shining a flashlight onto my fence, scribbling notes on a clipboard. It was downright eerie. When I reported this to the HOA, I got a curt email saying, "We have the right to inspect all exteriors for compliance." Meanwhile, Karen continued sending me notices that bordered on nonsensical. I got one letter claiming my front yard decorations, an old windmill ornament, and 2 ceramic gnomes posed potential hazards to pedestrians. Another demanded I repaint my garage door a more neighborhood-friendly color. Strange thing was, there were no actual guidelines listing approved colors. It felt like she was just pulling new rules out of thin air to keep me under constant pressure. I tried to warn my neighbors, but most were too intimidated to speak up. A few told me they'd been threatened with lawsuits or outrageous fines if they didn't stay in line. Rumors spread that Karen had connections in local government, someone in City Hall, perhaps, who helped rubber stamp her demands. Real or not, the gossip alone kept many people silent. Despite the tension, I held firm. I documented every letter, every suspicious occurrence, every odd face showing up on my security footage. I stored copies in both digital form and a small fireproof safe I kept in my closet, just in case. Hank and Shirley assured me I was doing the right thing, reminding me that intimidation tactics are often the last resort of bullies who sense they're losing control. A few days later, a bright yellow notice appeared on my door, claiming the cameras themselves were a violation of the neighborhood privacy agreement. That was the last straw. I knew I wasn't going to dismantle my cameras, and if the HOA wanted a showdown, I'd give them one. By this point, I was more determined than ever to let Karen and her cronies know. I wasn't the type to run, and I certainly wasn't about to be scared off in my own home. One evening, I returned from picking up groceries to find my front gate wide open. A bad feeling twisted my gut, and sure enough, the door from my garage to my kitchen had been left ajar. Immediately, I dialed Hank on my cell and whispered, "I think I have an intruder." He and Shirley promised they'd be over in a heartbeat. My heart pounded as I carefully stepped inside, calling out to see if anyone would respond. Silence. I crept through the living room, noticing drawers pulled open and papers scattered across my coffee table. It was like someone had been rifling through my personal files in a hurry. My mind flashed to the security footage. Hopefully I'd caught whoever did this. Then, out of the corner of my eye, I spotted a bold, handwritten note taped to my kitchen cabinet. "Stop this nonsense or else." Moments later, Hank and Shirley arrived, each armed with the stoic composure only ex-law enforcement can manage. Hank made a quick sweep of the house, while Shirley stood guard at the front door. Whoever had broken in was already gone. But the implications were clear. Karen, or someone from the HOA, had crossed the line into blatant criminal behavior. We checked the camera footage, but all we could see was a hooded figure tampering with the lens. The angle got shifted just enough that we missed a clear shot of the face. Still, the timing, the threatening note, and the rifled documents were enough to confirm we were dealing with more than petty harassment. Hank urged me to file a formal police report. "The more you let them push," he said, "the bolder they'll get." I mulled it over for a split second before nodding. Up until now, I'd been reluctant to involve the authorities. Part of me thought I could handle it quietly, out of respect for neighbors who didn't want the drama. But that note changed everything. It wasn't a request. It was a threat. So I made the call. An officer came by to take statements. Shirley and Hank vouched for me, explaining the litany of odd incidents that led up to this. The officer seemed genuinely concerned, but cautioned that without a positive ID, it could be tough to pin anything on Karen directly. As the officer left, I looked at the mess in my living room. Drawers pulled out, papers flung around, and I felt a surge of resolve. If Karen wanted a final standoff, I was ready to give it to her. I had allies, evidence, and the law on my side. And I had a suspicion that the next time we crossed paths, we'd both be playing for keeps. No more polite phone calls or passive-aggressive letters. This was about to become a full-blown fight for my home, my rights, and my peace of mind. The day after the break-in, I decided I'd had enough. I invited Hank and Shirley over to strategize. Using our combined experience, we hatched a plan. We'd lure Karen into revealing her true intentions. I reached out to her with a cordial-sounding note, stating I'd reconsidered the HOA's demands and was ready to talk things over on neutral ground, my front yard. Meanwhile, Hank discreetly coordinated with the local police to observe from a safe distance. Karen showed up, flanked by 2 board members who seemed all too eager to enforce her will. She pushed a contract in my face, demanding I sign away various rights under the guise of community regulations. I calmly asked why she felt the need to threaten and harass me. Karen's mask slipped. She launched into a rant about how my refusal set a dangerous precedent, that she needed to show people who's boss. Right on cue, the officers stepped in, having heard every word. When Karen tried to leave, one of her minions panicked and confessed to the break-ins, claiming they acted on Karen's orders. That was all the police needed to take Karen and her associates into custody, ending their reign of intimidation once and for all. Watching Karen and her cohorts get escorted away in handcuffs, I felt an odd mixture of relief and sadness. Relief that the nightmare was finally over. Sadness that our little neighborhood had been twisted by fear. My neighbors peeked from behind curtains and front doors, astonished that anyone had finally stood up to Karen's bullying. In the days that followed, our community underwent a remarkable transformation. People who'd kept silent began sharing their own stories of harassment and bogus fines. The HOA board was temporarily suspended, and a new team of volunteers formed to write fair, transparent bylaws. The talk around the block was no longer hushed whispers of dread, but rather friendly conversations about how to improve our little slice of Florida. As for me, I went back to my routine, tending my roses, walking my dog, and meeting Hank and Shirley for our monthly breakfast. My home finally felt like my sanctuary again. Sometimes, I still catch neighbors giving me a thankful nod, as if to say, "We appreciate what you did." I simply smile in return. After all, nobody should live in fear. We all deserve a safe, welcoming place to call home. This whole ordeal taught me a powerful lesson about standing up for what's right, no matter your age or situation. Fear often feeds on silence, and the only way to cut it down is by speaking up. Whether you're a retiree with a garden or a busy parent juggling 3 jobs, you have the right to live peacefully in your own home. In my case, I had the support of good friends, a dash of determination, and enough faith in our legal system to expose the truth. The experience reminded me that community isn't just about living next to each other. It's about looking out for one another. When people come together, they become stronger than any bully or corrupt organization. Sometimes, taking a stand is uncomfortable or even scary, but the reward, your freedom and peace of mind, is worth every ounce of courage. If you found this story meaningful, consider sharing it with friends who might be dealing with similar challenges. Leave a comment below about your own experience with neighborhood disputes or HOAs. Let's learn from each other. And if you haven't already, hit that subscribe button for more real-life tales of resilience and justice. Together, we can stand up against intimidation and create safer, happier communities for everyone.